I want you to just take a second and imagine writing a document so desperate and like so legally dense that it's literally titled The Self-Defense and Accusation Blood Letter from Prison.
Yeah, that title alone is just, it's incredibly heavy. And the contrast we're looking at today is, honestly, it's jarring.
It really is.
You take this desperate, highly emotional analog artifact from a man sitting in a cell and you feed it into the cold, completely impartial logic gates of advanced AI. I mean, we're talking ChatGPT, Copilot, DeepSeek, Gemini.
Right, which brings us to our sources for today's deep dive. We've got this fascinating, almost unprecedented stack of legal analyses generated by these major AI models. They were all fed a massive cache of case files, which included that blood letter, revolving around this independent Chinese scholar named Dr. Chen Jingyuan.
Exactly. And the mission here, our goal today, is to really explore how these different AI systems deconstruct a single, incredibly complex case.
Yeah, watching them cross-reference his situation against, domestic criminal law, constitutional rights, international human rights, and even internal political party rules.
It's fascinating to see how the algorithms connect those dots.
It is. But before we jump into how the AI did all that, I need to put a pin in something really important. Because our sources today deal with some highly politically charged legal and human rights issues, we need to be crystal clear with you listening. We are not taking any sides here, left or right.
Right, absolutely.
We are not endorsing the viewpoints of the original author, and we're not endorsing the judicial system either. Our mission today is simply to impartially report on how these AI models synthesized and analyzed the legal arguments presented in the source material.
Yeah, the focus is strictly on the mechanics of the law, and really how natural language processing interprets those mechanics based on the texts we fed it.
Exactly. So setting the stage really quickly here, Dr. Chen Jingyuan is an independent scholar, notably not a member of the Chinese Communist Party.
Right, that detail becomes very important.
Oh, hugely important. So he was sentenced to 1 year and 8 months in prison. And his crime, forwarding, commenting on, and liking posts on Twitter.
It sounds so mundane when you say it like that, but to understand this, we have to start at the root of the case, like the specific charge that actually put Dr. Chen behind bars. Because that establishes the whole baseline logic that the AI models are evaluating.
So he was charged under Article 293 of the Chinese criminal law. And the charge is picking quarrels and provoking trouble.
Which is, it's often referred to as a pocket crime.
Right, a pocket crime.
Yeah.
Because it's kind of this catch-all, right? Used to sweep up dissidents when, like, actual statutory charges just won't stick. The authorities claim that Chen was spreading false information and causing serious public disorder.
But when the AI models looked at this, they immediately flagged a massive substantive flaw in the whole architecture of that charge, because they analyzed the semantic nature of what he was actually retweeting.
And what was he retweeting? I mean, it wasn't exactly, like, bomb threats.
No, not at all. He was sharing foreign political speeches, specifically criticisms from Donald Trump, along with some historical data and literally pieces of art.
Right, and this is where the AI synthesis zeroes in on this concept of falsifiability. The way the models explain it, it's like the authorities tried to use a local zoning violation to condemn a house, but the AI reads the blueprints and goes, wait a minute, this house isn't even in that district.
That's a great way to put it. Large language models are fundamentally built on categorizing information, right? So when Gemini or ChatGPT parse the legal definition of a rumor, they are looking for a verifiable fact that can be objectively disproven.
Like saying the sky is green when it's blue.
Exactly. But the models understand that an emotional expression, a political critique, or a drawing, you just can't categorize those as objectively true or false.
They're subjective.
Right. Therefore, legally speaking, the AIs conclude those posts cannot fulfill the structural requirements of Article 293. They literally cannot be classified as rumors.
Oh, wow. And the sources also note another huge thing. Chen had, like, barely any followers.
Yeah, almost zero engagement on these retweets.
Right. So the AIs point out that the prosecution provided zero evidence of actual serious public disorder. There were no riots, no panic, no measurable offline impact whatsoever.
Which is a huge red flag for the AI. In criminal law, a statutory violation requires a causal link, like an unbroken chain between the digital action and real-world chaos. And the case files just show no such chain.
Okay, wait, let's unpack this for a second, because, I mean, it feels a bit like using a sledgehammer meant for a riot to swat, like a digital fly, right?
Yeah, massive overkill.
But wait, I remember from the case files, the judge, Ku Huijin, explicitly stated that because Chen has a high level of education, he has a PhD, right, that he should have known better.
Ah, yes. The should have known argument.
Right. So the court is basically saying, well, you have a PhD, therefore you are legally psychic,
Yeah.
and should have known this tweet would cause a riot that never actually happened. I mean, doesn't a court have the right to assume a scholar knows what he's doing?
We'll see the AIs universally flag that exact judicial logic as a critical violation.
Really?
Because using someone's educational background to presume their subjective intent to just assume, oh, he's smart, he knew this post was a rumor that violates the core legal principle of the presumption of innocence.
Oh, because you're substituting actual evidence with just an assumption about who the guy is.
Exactly. The models classify this as subjective presumption. Criminal law requires evidence-based judgment. The prosecution has the burden to prove with hard evidence that Chen knew the info was false and deliberately spread it to cause chaos.
Not just point to a diploma on his wall.
Right. Bypassing the burden of proof like that is a structural failure of due process. So on the substance alone, the AI models just completely dismantle the legal foundation.
But the blood letter doesn't stop at the definition of a rumor. It gets so much darker. It details the physical procedural reality of how the authorities actually processed the case.
Yeah, this is where we move from a semantic debate about digital speech into the really brutal anatomy of how the judicial system physically handled a citizen.
The details the AIs pull from Chen's claims are just jarring. We're talking about zero evidence at the time of arrest. The classic arrest first, find evidence later maneuver.
A violent plainclothes intrusion into his home, no warrant shown.
24-hour interrogations. Physical abuse, threats, and literally denying him food and bathroom breaks just to extract his social media passwords. It's horrifying.
And that procedural breakdown extends directly into the courtroom.
Yeah.
The trial was held in secret, which severely restricted his defense rights.
And in the appeal, right, the second instance trial was basically just a paper review.
Right, a paper review with no actual hearing.
Let's break that down for a second, because a paper review sounds harmless, but it means no hearing was held at all, right?
Yeah, the AIs point out that it functions as a bureaucratic silencer. By denying a physical hearing on appeal, the court ensures no new public record is created.
Wow. So the defendant has absolutely no opportunity to verbally challenge anything.
Exactly. No cross-examining witnesses, no challenging evidence. It essentially just rubber stamps the initial verdict under the guise of giving him an appeal.
But the most shocking part of these AI summaries, hands down, involve the prosecutor, Gabe In.
Yeah, this part is wild.
He allegedly admitted in court that he didn't verify the evidence, and he explicitly stated he didn't even plan to verify it, citing, quote, special instructions from higher-ups.
And the AIs flag that statement as a massive shift in the analysis. Because it moves the situation from, individual incompetence or laziness into the realm of systemic, coordinated subversion.
It implies the outcome was totally predetermined, regardless of any facts.
Exactly.
Which leads to Chen explicitly accusing the Kunming judicial authorities of being a judicial mafia, or Sikaibong in Chinese. And I want to push on this a bit, because judicial mafia, it sounds like a great movie title, but legally speaking, is that just a frustrated guy venting from a prison cell? Or do the AIs actually find real legal grounding for an organized crime charge here?
So the AI models, particularly DeepSeek and Copilot, they provide this really nuanced breakdown of the distinction. Under China's anti-organized crime law, to prove a literal mafia, you have to demonstrate a stable criminal syndicate that is actively seeking illegal financial profits.
Right, and these guys aren't exactly running an underground casino or an extortion racket.
No, they're not. However, the AIs don't just look for traditional mob activity. They look at the mechanics of the corruption. If police, prosecutors, and judges are acting in systemic collusion to bypass the law under those higher-up instructions.
So then it triggers severe criminal liabilities for the officials themselves.
Exactly. The AI didn't just read the insult, it mapped their specific behavior to actual statutes.
Wow.
So Copilot flagged the secret trial and the paper review appeal as mechanisms for Article 399, which is bending the law for personal gain.
And I'm guessing the lack of warrants and the crazy interrogations map to other stuff.
Yeah, that maps to Article 397 for abuse of power and Article 247 for extortion of confessions by torture. So the AI concludes that while judicial mafia might be rhetorically charged, it actually accurately describes what they call a protective umbrella of systemic judicial failure.
That is wild. So Chen is faced with a system that openly admits it doesn't care about the facts. And he realizes a standard legal defense is basically useless. So he does something brilliant. He changes the battlefield entirely.
He really does.
He evaluates his captors using their own internal rulebook. He moves the entire analysis from state law to political doctrine.
It's a fascinating strategic pivot. He weaponizes the system's own ideological framework right against it.
Yeah, because during the interrogations, officers were apparently yelling all these ideological insults at him. They accused him of eating the party's food, smashing the party's
And
bot.
treating him like he was a traitor to the organization.
But the AI models highlight this glaring foundational paradox. Dr. Chen is an independent scholar. As we mentioned earlier, he is not and has never been a member of the Chinese Communist Party.
Which totally shifts the context.
Yeah, they're essentially throwing a red card at a guy who's just sitting in the bleachers eating a hot dog. He's not even playing in the soccer match. He isn't bound by the internal rules of their team.
Yeah.
But how does pointing that out actually serve as a defense mechanism?
Well, it turns the accusation inward, almost like a mirror. Because while Chen isn't a party member, the enforcers, the police, the prosecutors, the judges, they absolutely are.
Oh, right.
And DeepSeek, which is a Chinese-developed model, offers some incredible nuance here when it dives into the CCP's own internal discipline regulations.
Which are super strict, right?
Extremely. These regulations mandate that party members must adhere to significantly higher standards of conduct than ordinary citizens.
So the AIs are essentially auditing the interrogators using their own CCP handbook.
Exactly. And the AIs point out that by abusing their power, faking evidence, and humiliating a citizen, these judicial officials are directly violating the CCP's mass discipline and working discipline. The rules explicitly forbid alienating the public or acting with bureaucratic arrogance. Wait, there's this concept the AIs pulled out from the sources here that is just fascinating. Low-level red, high-level black.
Yes.
That implies that their over-the-top performative loyalty is actually a form of political sabotage.
Basically, yeah. Authoritarian systems are incredibly vulnerable to overzealous local officials. So low-level red refers to these grassroots enforcers acting hyper-loyal and aggressively patriotic.
Like trying to show how tough they are on dissidents.
Right. But high-level black means that this clumsy, brutal enforcement ultimately blackens the reputation of the central government.
Wow. So by trying so hard to look like defenders of the state, they end up exposing the state as petty and cruel.
Exactly. The AI models synthesize that by treating Chen this way to supposedly protect the system, the officials are the ones committing severe political violations. They damage the party's image in the eyes of the public.
Which is probably considered a way bigger threat to systemic stability than a scholar retweeting Donald Trump.
Oh, absolutely. He literally used the AI's ability to parse internal political documents to prove that his captors are the true dissidents. That is brilliant.
It's a masterclass in turning the tables.
Okay, let's zoom out from the interrogation room for a second, all the way to the global stage, because this gets even bigger. How does one individual's digital footprint collide with macro-level international diplomacy?
Well, Dr. Chen argues that prosecuting him for sharing foreign viewpoints directly contradicts major national doctrines, specifically this concept of the community with a shared future for mankind.
Right, which is this massive diplomatic doctrine that China promotes. It's all about global cultural exchange, mutual learning, open borders for ideas.
And the AI models assess this from an international law perspective, and they find a severe logical collision.
How so?
Well, think about it. If a domestic court punishes a citizen for retweeting a public speech made by a foreign government official and legally labels that speech as a punishable rumor,
Oh?
the domestic court is indirectly passing a negative sovereign judgment on that foreign state's official speech.
Okay, I have to push back here a little bit. We went from a single retweet with basically zero engagement to, like, potential diplomatic friction. Isn't it a bit of a stretch to say prosecuting one scholar threatens international relations?
I mean, it seems like a stretch at first glance, until you examine the mechanism of the chilling effect, which the AIs extensively validate in their analysis.
Okay, walk me through that.
China absolutely has domestic legal jurisdiction, right? But the internet is inherently a borderless information space. So when a local court criminalizes the sharing of foreign academic or official speech, it sends a systemic message to everyone.
A message that foreign ideas are legally hazardous.
Precisely.
It basically builds an invisible wall that prevents any citizen from participating in global discourse.
Right. And the models conclude that this hyper-aggressive local enforcement creates a massive contradiction for the state. It exposes a gaping hole between what the country preaches on the global stage, non-interference, open cultural exchange, a shared future, and how local judicial systems actually execute the law on the ground.
You literally cannot foster a shared global future if acknowledging the outside world is treated as a domestic crime.
Exactly.
Man, it really makes you realize how interconnected the whole architecture of information really is. We've just unpacked an incredibly dense, intense stack of documents today. We watched multiple advanced AI models process Dr. Chen Jingyuan's blood letter, and what they found was that a seemingly simple pocket crime charge just unspooled into a massive structural failure.
Yeah, they mapped out this whole web of alleged human rights violations, procedural breakdowns, misapplied internal party discipline, and deep contradictions with global diplomatic policy, all stemming from a few digital clicks.
It's staggering, and for you listening, you might be wondering why the intricacies of a distant legal battle matter to your daily life. But I mean, we live in an era of absolute information overload. We're all constantly sharing, retweeting, engaging, and commenting.
Everyone leaves a digital footprint.
Exactly. And this deep dive really illustrates how terrifyingly thin the boundary between sharing a thought and committing a crime can become when a legal system prioritizes compliance over constitutional rights.
It forces us to recognize why procedural guardrails aren't just bureaucratic red tape. Things like due process, the presumption of innocence, and the absolute requirement for empirical evidence of harm.
Those are the only mechanisms that actually protect ordinary citizens from systemic overreach.
Right, because when those mechanisms are replaced by assumptions and, special instructions from higher-ups, the entire concept of justice basically collapses.
It really does. And I want to leave you with a final thought to mull over today. Something that the sources hint at, but that really opens up a whole new frontier for us to consider. We just watched multiple AI systems instantly ingest a document written in blood.
Right.
We watched them cross-reference it against criminal law, international treaties, and political doctrine, exposing systemic contradictions that an entire human judicial apparatus either missed or actively ignored.
It really raises a profound question about accountability in the future.
Exactly. Could an AI possessing perfect recall of the law and absolutely zero political fear eventually serve as the ultimate impartial defense attorney for those who have been systematically silenced?
That is, wow, that's a haunting thought.
It really is.
Yeah.
Because when you are sitting in a prison cell writing a desperate letter to a system that openly refuses to listen, and AI might just be the only entity left that can read the law exactly as it was written, point to that jagged white line on the x-ray and say, there it is, that's the break.